to Freshly Forever, a podcast that gives you fascinating insights week after week. Here's your host, Vi Kumar.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode on podcast Freshly Forever. Today I have the pleasure of having here with us Nicole Meier. She is the author of 3 critically acclaimed women's fiction novels. She has worked as a travel blogger, a contributing writer to lifestyle magazines, and she has taught creative workshops in libraries, schools, wellness retreats, and writers' conferences. Her book coaching program aims to help fiction writers find their muse and craft the novel of their dreams. Welcome, Nicole, to Podcast Freshly Forever. Such a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, how did your journey begin as a book coach?
I love talking about this because it's fairly new. I'm an author of 3 published novels, and this is something that I wish I had in my book writing journey, was someone to walk alongside me from concept all the way to pitching publishers. So it kind of was a happy accident. I was not intending to be a book coach, but when the pandemic hit and we were all stuck at home at the beginning of 2020, I decided to host a few creative workshops online to help people get back into their creativity and kickstart their projects. And what I thought would just be a couple of months worth of workshops turned into the majority of the writing students who attended those workshops asking me if I would stay with them until they were finished writing their book.
Oh, how wonderful.
So before I knew it, I was doing one-on-one coaching, which I loved. And then I enrolled in a program to get my certification. And I just have been going for 2 years now, just loving it so much, just helping other writers. And I get so much joy when they, dive into their manuscript and see something of value that they're creating.
Mm-hmm. You said certification. Does that mean all book coaches have to have a certification?
They don't. Just like life coaches, they could have a certification or not. But for me, I think it's important to just keep continuing our education. And I want to make sure all my skills are the best that they can be. And I want to be able to show up for writers in the best way that I can.
Absolutely. And I think, anyone that listens to this podcast would value that, your rationale behind that. And what patterns, Nicole, do you normally see in any individual that makes you think, okay, he or she has a compelling account to share?
What I've noticed is that so many people have these amazing stories to share. There is not a limit on the amount of unique voices and stories out there. But what there is sort of, unfortunately, a limit on is people's belief in themselves. And so a lot of times writers will come to me, especially emerging writers or emerging authors, with an amazing story, and they have a gift of telling a story. Maybe their craft isn't 100% polished, but that's okay. But I noticed that there's a lot of self-doubt, that imposter syndrome of who am I to write a story? Who would be interested in my book? So that is actually a pattern I see, and it's a habit and a belief system I like to break right away. We are all worthy of telling stories, and it's so important to get your words onto the page because of that.
Oh, yes. Imposter syndrome. Tell me about it. I really need someone here on the podcast to talk about that specifically.
Right.
And when you say, okay, you help people come out with their account, and I value the fact that you recognize a lot of people have so much to share. So what exactly is worthy of coming out in a book, or what should come out in a book? I don't really want to categorize something as worthy or not worthy, truly, but I guess what can come out in a book?
I think right now, especially, we need unique voices and we need authentic voices. I do see a lot of people who are big readers and they love, a certain genre of book. And what happens is, unless we get quiet and tap into our own voice, writers tend to be a copycat of other books that are already out there because they think that's what will sell. So it's really important to stick to your own voice, your own point of view, because that's what's worthy. People want to hear stories, and they can relate. The more open and authentic you can be with your own voice and your own story, the more people will want to root for you and read your pages and engage with you.
Okay. Now that you said that, authenticity, I was going to get to that in a little bit. But what types of book writing can anyone do? Does it always have to be fiction? We talk about, getting the reader oriented. Do you think fiction is the one genre that can get readers hooked onto your book? Or what other types of genre can people resort to come out with their best self?
That is such a good question. I specifically work with fiction writers because that's my wheelhouse, right? I'm a novelist. That's what I know. I truly believe that there's so many novels out there that create empathy in a way that is not done through other forms of art, although it can be. There's something about fiction writing, whether you're writing about a villain or a hero, if you share insight into why that person is making the decisions they are, it creates empathy with the reader, and it just broadens our sort of welcoming and engagement with other kinds of people, whether they have our belief systems or not, whether they have our background or not. Certainly fiction or nonfiction can do this, and self-help and wellness books can do this. I read across the board, all genres, but what I am skilled at is helping people write fiction, which is novels.
But there are book coaches out there that can help people with other aspects of book writing, correct? Or rather, other genres as well.
Absolutely. There's amazing book coaches out there for all the genres. I mean, really specific genres too. Some book coaches only do magical realism. Some only do business books. There's definitely someone out there for everyone.
And how long has this whole book coaching thing been around, do you think?
I think it's new. It's emerging. Just as life coaching was out there for years, it really didn't become accepted and popular until people realized that there's not just one way to get support in your life. And book coaching, to me, I think is pretty new. Again, this is something I didn't have. I didn't even know about when I was writing my books, but I wish I had. I had a literary agent, I had an editor, and I had a publisher, but they all stayed in their lane and they didn't cross over. So the editor would just hand me my pages back, and she wouldn't stay with me in terms of brainstorming and concept development. She just did her job and then she was done. A book coach will stay with you from beginning to end and really work out these problems with you and get you to get your best work on the page.
Okay. Say, if anyone listening to this podcast wants to write a book, how can you help them narrow down on a genre, or how can they themselves figure, okay, this is my best shot at writing this book?
Great question. So the first thing that I work with on writers is to identify their deep level why. So what is the point of your book? Why are you doing this? And if your purpose is shallow, right? I just want people to read my book. Well, that's not deep enough for me. I want to know why. Is this an act of service? Is this an act of entertainment? Is this an act of support? What will a reader get from your story? And from then once they identify that, we can identify their audience and the way to market the book and so on and so forth.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, it's wonderful that you said it can be an act of service. It can be several other things. So what actually catches a reader's attention when it comes to, going into a book? Is it just the first few pages? And how important is it for a writer to capitalize on what actually matters to a reader?
That's a great question too. And I would say the first 3 chapters are meant to hook the reader, the editor, the publisher, everybody who comes across your book. You need those first 3 chapters to sing. And what I mean by that is you have to tell your promise in those first 3 chapters. When a reader opens your book, they want to know what you're promising them in those first 3 chapters. Am I promising a roller coaster of entertainment? Am I promising a heartwarming story of family? Am I promising a way to improve your life or improve your business? You have to give that promise in the first 3 chapters.
So it kind of ties to the why aspect of writing that book, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So when it comes to Nicole as a book coach, how do you help develop a narrative? Does it always have to be, someone, having something start to finish in like a journal before you can formally sit down to write a book? Where does one begin?
That's a great question as well. I love all your questions.
Oh, thankfully I have the right questions. I mean, I guess this is meant to be so much of a discussion oriented thing. That's what podcasting is about. Yes, podcasting can be interview based, but I guess these are all the things that come to my mind. And like when I see you and when you tell me, okay, hey, I'm a book coach and this is what prompts me to ask you.
Right. So I would say I like working with writers before they have a manuscript developed. I like coming in when they only have a chapter or two under their belt, because oftentimes, and I was guilty of this too when I was writing, I would just sit down and pour everything onto the page, oftentimes without a real purpose or outline or a deep level why of why I was doing it. And a lot of times if a writer comes to me with too many pages already done and they don't have the point of their book nailed down, they have to go back and rewrite everything. For example, I've had one client who came to me and said she wanted to write a novel and she wanted it to be a fantasy novel, kind of like Lord of the Rings type of thing. And once we sat down and worked on her deep level why and the point of the book, we realized she really wanted to write a book about self-help and wellness. So we had to rewrite everything. So really, it's important that I get involved at the beginning stages, because otherwise there's so much time and energy wasted.
Okay. Then does it mean every chapter, you kind of reassess yourself and ask this question, okay, does this really tie and reflect on the why aspect of my book?
Yes. So I take it chapter by chapter, and each chapter needs to have a point. What is the point of the scene? What is the point of the chapter? Is it moving the story forward? And all writers, whether you're seasoned or not, need to keep asking themselves this question, because sometimes we get lost in the weeds and we just have fun telling a scene, but it has nothing to do with the point of the story or the lesson of the story.
So that again, the purpose or the lesson of that story or that topic, maybe also helps you nail down the chapter topic as well, right?
Right. So if the point of a book is self-awareness and self-growth, we definitely want each chapter to show the character or the person telling the story evolving and getting towards that goal. If we stray and just talk about something fun but has nothing to do with that goal, then it pulls the reader out of the story, and then they don't really believe the journey very much.
Yeah, you certainly don't want people dropping that book, although one says don't judge a book by its cover, like sometimes everyone tends to flip to the back and then read what it is about, and then there goes it. What about any foundational questions one must ask themselves before, say, okay, tomorrow I want to start writing a book? If I want to be an author, for me to ascertain my ability to be an author or to successfully come out with my book, what foundational questions should I ask myself, or should I ask with your help? I know you talked about the why. What else needs to be asked during this stage?
So commitment to time. A lot of times creative people have so many great ideas running around in their head, but they don't think about what is a time commitment. And can I really sit down every day and commit either research or writing to this project? It's not going to help if you think you can only come to the page every 5 months, because then the momentum is lost. So one of the other things besides the deep level why that I ask my clients is, do you have what it takes to commit time to this project? Because it's not always about skill, it's about tenacity.
So how long of a project can you categorize writing a book to be?
Well, it just depends on what they're writing. If it's a novel, it could take up to a year or more to write. If it's something like self-help, which is a shorter page count, it could take maybe 6 months. It just depends on the writer and how much time they're willing to give to the project.
Okay. And does it matter as far as reader attention or being successful writing and publishing a book, as far as what is the length or how many chapters you write? Like, doesn't matter if you write 400 pages, doesn't matter if you write 30 or 50 or 150. How do editors, publishers, everyone, and the reader community, what is your take on that, Nicole?
So there is a formula, and it's definitely, if you want to be traditionally published, they will look at the formula. So if you were to write a novel, it needs to be around 85,000 words or more. So that's maybe 325 pages. If you would like to write something in the business or self-help category, that's less. That's around 65,000 words. Could be between 100 and 200 pages. So there's a formula that they look for. And oftentimes, if you submit a novel that's too short, the editor will say, you're not ready yet. Come back when this is a full-length novel.
Okay. That's a good tip. And in fact, when you spoke about the tenacity aspect and one's ability to devote a certain amount of time, takes me back to something that I heard in the past. It seems like 85% of us want to write a book, but then only 3% of us, tend to be successful.
Right.
So is that because of the time aspect that a lot of people don't end up writing, or is it something else?
Yes, so many people. I'm sure you've come across people as well say, I've always wanted to write a book. But just like any other form of art or even opening your own small business, it takes dedication, it takes time, it takes tenacity. And that's what's going to win. So if someone has difficulty sitting down and really, writing, if they just are jumping up all the time and getting distracted all the time, I hate to say it, but they don't have what it takes to write a full-length book. So it is about commitment. And halfway through the book, we get lost in the weeds and we have to remember, why are we doing this? Some people give up halfway. This is too hard. I've written for 6 months. I've written 100 pages. I can't do this anymore. So I suggest they step away for a moment and come back in a week and really read their pages and see if they're still inspired. But really, you have to be tenacious. You have to show up every day. That's what I believe.
Okay. And why is it that there's 85%, but then the 3% aspect? Why does that happen? And also, to the point that you just reflected upon, is research the reason, or lack of research being the reason that people are not, able to successfully take idea into, incorporating that idea?
That's part of it for sure. I do have prospective clients that come to me and say, I want to write a thriller. And I say, great, what are your 5 most favorite thriller authors out there, favorite thriller books? And they will sheepishly admit, well, I haven't read in a few years, so I haven't read any books at all. And then I think, okay, you haven't done your research. You need to see what books resonate with me, what kind of author do I want to be, and what did those other authors do in order to get the success they have today. So yes, research for sure. And oftentimes people aren't sure of the publishing path. It's not just you write a book and you show up at Random House and hand it over and they'll publish it the next day. There's a lot of things that people need to know of the gatekeepers, and do I need an agent? Do I not? Is self-publishing better for me, or is traditional publishing better for me? So yes, you're right. There definitely needs to be a research element involved.
Okay. How do you set yourself a timeline then? And do you just put it into different buckets? Okay, let me just brainstorm first. And then, let me just go set aside this much of time for research, or rather, how can one be accountable? And what is the role of a book coach in whatever we talked about, all of these, in all these aspects?
That is a great segue into something I love to suggest to my clients once we get going together is to create an accountability calendar.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you looked at the month of January, you would look week by week and say, okay, if I only have 2 hours every day, or maybe an hour every day to dedicate to this book writing project, what does that look like in a calendar? So I will say, pick one day where you just do research. You can just be looking online. One day you could make a Pinterest board just for your setting, get right down to the wallpaper and the trees outside. The next day you're going to spend 2 hours just writing about what's going to happen in the scene of the first chapter.
Mm-hmm.
The next day you might be researching publishing paths. So really you can fill that calendar with a goal. And a lot of times I tell people, set a timer so you don't feel overwhelmed. If we do things in small chunks of time, I say less than 3 hours at a time, you're more apt to accomplish it because it doesn't feel like I have to spend 6 hours doing this writing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And probably just setting yourself like a goal of writing one chapter and not going beyond that, thinking, I just have so much to offer today. Maybe, let me put it all in. Does that, you think that would end up reflecting on the quality of what you want to convey?
I think so. There's a certain point in time when a writer needs to get up and do something else to fill that creative well.
Mm-hmm.
So go for a walk in nature, go to a museum and look at other people's forms of art, listen to music, do something else to keep stimulating that form of inspiration. If you sit down for 6 hours, great, but there is a really good chance that you're going to burn out too quickly and then you give up on the project because it just feels exhausting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And just to go back to your point about, when you ask candidates that are potential book authors, when they come to you, you ask them, hey, what are some of your favorite authors or blah, 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 whatever. And they say something back to you or they don't know. Does it also reflect on the aspect of great readers end up being wonderful writers?
Absolutely.
Is that the case?
Absolutely. I think book lovers make the best writers because they've done so much research.
Mm-hmm.
Research is reading. You dive into these stories of why do I like this author? Why do I like their stories? And that is the best kind of research. So yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when is a good starting point for someone to become like this voracious reader? Is it middle school, high school? What is a great starting point?
Oh gosh, I think in my personal opinion, any part of your life, any point in your life, you can become a great reader. Of course, there's a lot of us who have, a childhood favorite book that we loved. For me, it was To Kill a Mockingbird in high school. I just loved that book by Harper Lee. But I think even if you're 65 and you're just beginning to become a book lover, that's great because, you have evolved and your tastes and your wisdom has evolved. And so you'll come to it with a different sort of lens, if you will.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what is it that tends to make someone get, say, stuck during their book writing process? And how do you, Nicole, as a book coach, then help them, kind of cross that hurdle?
We all get stuck. And that's very natural, right? We either get tired or we get lost in the weeds. We forget the point of the book. So I have a lot of prompts, writing prompts and homework that my clients do in between sessions. We meet every couple of weeks, month after month, and they turn in pages to me, but they also turn in homework. Mm-hmm. So if they're stuck on a scene, I have a lot of prompts that will help you get unstuck. I don't believe in writer's block. I just believe in redirection. So if someone says, I bring in a new character onto a page and I'm stuck, I don't know what to do, I just don't have any inspiration, I'll say, okay, we're going to take a side project for 20 minutes a day and you're going to write a letter from that character. What are their biggest fears? What are their biggest wants? What are their biggest dreams? And before they know it, they have this character development on the side and they're so excited to talk about that character in the story. And they use elements of that sort of letter writing prompt in their novel and they begin again.
Oh, awesome. Back in a moment with our guest on Freshly Forever. what about this duration of your sessions with people? How long typically does it last? And uh, what do you think is the most effective method that you have found for people to, take the most away from your sessions?
So usually if someone signs up for the monthly book coaching, it's a 3-month minimum. So they'll go 3 months at a time, and then they can sign up for 3 more months or however they want to do it. They can go off on their own. But I really like to meet every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So they will turn in maybe 20 pages to me, and I will do the developmental editing. So that means in document notes and edits. And then I'll bring that up on the screen, and we have a Zoom every 2 weeks, and we go over each note and any questions, and then we just go from there.
Okay. So that is where you as a book coach probably are able to come in, chip in, and help what someone is not able to do on their own, I assume.
Yeah, it just offers fresh eyes and fresh perspective of, hey, I'm really confused in this chapter. The timeline is all crazy and I don't know where I am in the story. So let's rewrite this and let's talk about how we can do that. And then we kind of work on it in a collaborative way.
Okay. And Nicole, your 3 books and your passion for fiction as a genre, why don't you tell listeners about it? How you just ended up figuring out, okay, that's my passion and that's where I want to focus on.
Right. I had secretly always wanted to become a novelist, but I didn't have the sort of courage or faith in myself. I thought you had to be someone very special and very, edgy or smart or whatever it was to become a novelist.
Mm-hmm.
But I was already a writer. I was working as a freelance writer for different magazines and different publications. So it really took someone encouraging me, and that was a fellow writer, took me to a writer's conference.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time that I walked into a big sort of hotel full of writers, editors, agents, publishers, and I knew that I'd found my people.
Mm-hmm.
So from that date forward, I got the courage to start writing my own books. And what was on my heart at the time, and what is still one of my favorite genres, is women's fiction, which means the journey of a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so I write about a woman's journey, whether it be a family dynamic or starting a business, or I do a lot of sister stories. And I'm so grateful that my friend took me to that conference because it gave me the inspiration I needed to write what was on my heart and get it on the page and get it published.
Okay, wonderful. How important then is vocabulary for any individual, for someone thinking, okay, maybe, I just need to have all these complex words, in my story. Or what is it that you think, readers, or it tends to reach the reader most effectively in conveying someone's message?
Right.
And tying that to your experience as a fiction writer.
I don't believe that vocabulary needs to be as sophisticated as someone might believe. I think sometimes the really simple stories are the ones that touch people the most.
Mm-hmm.
What I do tell writers is don't write as if someone is looking over your shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes people say, well, I want to write, about my family or write about someone I know, but I don't want to hurt their feelings or I don't want to cause a fight. And I say, I can tell that on the page because you're hiding details. You're just telling me the surface. You're not getting deeper. And so don't write as if someone's reading over your shoulder. Just write with full freedom and abandon, and we can go back and edit later.
Okay. Right there, you talked about the authenticity, and how can just someone find that courage to be their most authentic self?
It comes down to something really simple. Someone told me a long time ago is write as if you were sitting in a coffee shop having a conversation with a friend, and your natural voice will come out.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't use overly fancy or overly sophisticated words in your everyday language, then don't write like that because it will show.
Okay.
Don't use a lot of catchphrases and buzzwords if that's not how you normally speak, because that will show. Just write as if you're having a conversation.
So that's perhaps when everything can come from the heart, right?
Yes.
Okay. And finding an editor, publisher, like if we were to say, okay, step A is you come up with your idea, you ask your why, say, sit with a book coach, brainstorm, whatever that may be. So when we just go through the steps in someone wanting to write a book and what they would go through, so now that we have covered these, what about the role of editors, publishers? When is it that you approach or get to that stage and find them? And you, as a book coach, do you get involved in that process?
I do get involved in that process, and we talk about it from the beginning. Oftentimes I will say, okay, this week we're taking an hour and I'm going to show you and talk to you about all of the pros and cons of all the publishing paths. So we talk about self-publishing, we talk about hybrid publishing, we talk about small presses, and we talk about the big five, the big traditional publishers.
Mm-hmm.
And once I lay out the pros and cons, 9 times out of 10, the writer will change their mind on what their goal is, their publishing goal, because they realize they might say, oh, I want one of the big fives. I want Random House or Simon & Schuster to publish my book. I want to be famous. I want to be in Costco and airports and Target.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I tell them, that's great, but this is how you get there, and also you're going to give up some creative control, they realize what they really wanted was a small press where they can be collaborative and choose their own title and choose their own book cover and really be involved with their editor. And it feels right for them. So I definitely talk to writers early on. What's your goal? And now let me tell you the pros and cons of each path, and let's reassess your goal.
Okay. What about self-publishing? And what about this hybrid model?
Yeah. Self-publishing can be an amazing path because you have so much creative control and you can actually make a lot of money. But if you're not the type of person who can launch a small business on your own and show up for the development, the marketing, the business plan, you are not the person to self-publish because it requires so much work and so much dedication. If you are a marketer at heart, self-publishing might be great for you because you are going to do all the things. But if you don't want to do any of those things, then I don't recommend it because really it is opening a small business to do that.
Okay. Once someone says, okay, I have my story cover to cover, whatever account of what they want to say in the genre that they've chosen, how long of this phase, is this editing and then publishing and all of that for anyone listening and wants to know?
So I usually say when I was writing novels, it took me maybe 8 months to write the first draft and then 3 more months of editing. That's not everybody. That's just using me as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And then it depends on your goal, right? So if you wanted to self-publish or do hybrid, you're going to get to market the fastest, meaning within a year. If you're doing small press or the big five traditional, you're taking 2 to 3 years to get onto bookshelves.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends on your goal again, and just know that it's a long game. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we talked about, making money. So what are some relevant questions there to ask even when someone determines their goal? Or is it always money that one should go after?
Definitely not always money. If your goal is to make money, then, we'll talk about that. But if your goal is to just be of service or to entertain or to reach, women who are looking for inspiration, then we talk about how to meet that goal. And it's not always about the money. And also your first book might be your foundation or your launching pad. And then your next books 2 and 3 might be the way that you start to make a real income because people needed to find you first. And then you keep showing up as a career author and then you start making the money you would like to make.
Okay. And you mentioned about, the different publishing houses and options. For someone that says, okay, I want to approach the top publishing houses, how can one get that visibility? Is that, like connections, networking? How does that happen?
Yeah, and this is one of the biggest misconceptions that new writers have to learn is that there are gatekeepers. So if you would like to be published by, one of the big 4, the big 5, you need to have a literary agent do this for you. So they will submit your work for you. And I always warn people, getting a literary agent is like the American Idol for writers. It's not just you look up an agent and ask them to start working with you. You have to really impress them. and turn in a very specific formula to them of pages and it's a pitch letter. And they will take anywhere from 3 months to 9 months to 2 years to read those first 3 pages and get back to you and say, I'd love to represent you, or no, I'm sorry, this isn't the work for me. It is a very long process. So I always tell people, look, this isn't overnight success. It's just like maybe a songwriter doesn't just write a song one day and walk into the big, record company and say, I'm ready, let's go. You really have to go through a very specific process, and there's no cutting in line.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, that's good to know. So I think it's just best to start small and then become big, and have them come to you probably at some stage saying, "Hey, I love your work, and how about you write something that we can publish?" And when you talk about the why of writing, say you have narrowed down your target audience, you have your point you're trying to make. How do you kind of finally marry it all? Is there something else that we are missing as far as outlining what one should go after, or kind of do as part of their checklist to be able to write successfully?
It's about dedicating yourself, showing up to the page, having that tenacity, and being willing to do the research. And also the last piece of when you finally do work with a coach or a book editor is to take edits gracefully and not be defensive, because then you won't grow and learn in your craft.
So constructive criticism is something to look for, and
yes.
Not feel offended. And okay, then the big aspect of trust comes in, right? How important is trust? And for someone to not feel their story has been taken, and for me to come and feel free to talk my idea through with you. It almost seems like a small business going to investors and telling them what their idea is about, right? So I guess, how is that candidate to book coach relationship, and how does the whole trust thing work?
Gosh, that's such a wise question. And I would say it's all about finding the right chemistry and the right fit. So the writer needs to feel comfortable that they'll be supported in the way they want to be supported. So just because I am a good book coach might not mean I'm the right fit for you. You might be looking for someone who speaks to you in a certain way, or who shows up to you in the Zoom calls in a certain way. You need to find the right chemistry. And then I always encourage writers to reach out to several coaches at once and ask them the questions you want to ask, and then compare and contrast the coaches and see who feels like the right person for you.
Okay, so each person's needs may be different, and their comfort level with someone addressing their needs to the very best possible extent is what that matters the most. Okay, and encouragement and motivation to someone who's writing a book. How critical is that? And where does all this come from? What about the support system surrounding a writer?
Right. I think everybody deserves a cheerleader in their corner.
Why not?
Yeah. So when I do, for example, developmental editing, which means I'm doing the in-document edits, I always balance them with praise and then criticism, but it's constructive. So we all need that praise. Like, oh, I love this scene, or I love this chapter. This made me cry, because we need to know what's working. And if you just tell someone what's not working, that's not helpful. We need a balance.
We talked about the criticism, doubt. How important is risk-taking for anyone?
It's very important. Just to tell your neighbor or your friend or your spouse that you think you want to write a book is a risk. And once you do that, it's not so scary. You say, okay, nothing bad happened to me. I told somebody. And then the same goes with sharing some of your sample pages with someone. It feels so scary, like the biggest risk. But once you share it and you get some feedback, you think, I can do this again. That wasn't too bad. And it's important to take those risks, because we realize it's not such a big deal after all.
And how long has it been since you authored your first book?
My first book came out in 2015.
Yeah. Okay. And how did it feel back then, when you had to sit down and write your first book?
Well, I should say my first book lives in a drawer and didn't get published. That was a practice novel. So no one really saw that. But then my first book, like I said, that got published, came out in 2015, and it felt scary and amazing and exciting. I almost compare launching that book to having maybe a wedding or some big ceremony, because you're so nervous and you know everyone's looking at you, but it feels so good when people are supporting you and clapping for you, and it's just a wonderful feeling.
And is that the House of Bradbury that came
Yes.
first? Okay. And then came The Girl Made of Clay, and then The Second Chance Supper Club happens to be the most recent one, correct?
Yes, correct.
And all of these contemporary women's fiction.
Yes.
Okay. And we did talk about authenticity in bringing out the very natural messaging and delivery that someone can do. What about any other mistakes that can happen during the writing process, and how can one overcome them?
We can always overcome our mistakes. I'm not too worried about that. I'd rather someone just keep showing up, even if the page is a mess. I'd rather they just keep showing up, as opposed to letting perfectionism stand in the way. And then they keep rewriting and they never turn anything in because they're so worried about being perfect. So messy is okay. Messy is welcome. Just keep showing up.
Okay. And have you always found only people that are the most creative to be good writers, or you also tend to kind of learn on the job, so to speak, and discover your creativity, discover your inner self at some point?
Yes, anyone can be a writer. They just have to be willing, and they have to have a certain level of vulnerability of sharing a piece of themselves or sharing their perspective on the world. Again, you could be extremely creative, but be too much of a perfectionist and too guarded. And then your stories don't resonate with people. It's people who are willing to show up and be vulnerable and keep trying and share a piece of themselves.
Okay, excellent. Finally, I think we have everything together. We have identified editor, publisher, blah, blah, blah. What about the book cover design and forming this launch team and marketing it? And especially when it comes to self-publishing, how do you go about it all?
Yes, that could take another hour for sure. There are definitely different ways to do all of this. I do encourage writers, if they know they want to go down any publishing path, doesn't matter which one it is, to think about putting a little bit of money aside for the marketing. Because unfortunately today, the publishers just don't have the money to send everybody on book tour or do ads or marketing for people. So whether that means you're going to reach out to book clubs or do Facebook ads, or get a book publicist, which I recommend, it does require a little bit of money. So start setting aside money now, just so you have that cushion of something you can invest in and say, okay, I'm going to launch my book in 3 months and 6 months. Let me reach out and do a couple ads, or let me reach out to a publicist and get their advice.
Is it an overwhelming amount of money that one needs to set aside and invest finally to be able to make some return out of their book and be of service or be of use, be of, whatever their purpose is?
Depends on your goal. If your goal is to reach, 5 million people within a week, then yes, you need to put a lot of money into it. But if your goal is to just do kind of an organic launch on social media, that doesn't cost as much. So it really depends on their goal.
Yeah. Some people even have 5 million followers on social media, and that makes it even more easier. And what else would be your message to anyone listening and wondering if they are author material?
I would say, start taking some courses online. There are so many great writing courses. It could just be an hour-long course, or it could be a month-long course. Brush up on your skills, because even the best of writer needs to keep brushing up on their skills. And then start following authors that you love and see what they're doing. Who's their publisher? What kinds of books are they writing? How are they talking on social media? Just kind of do that research, and then find someone who loves books, whether it's a reader, another writer, a book coach, an editor, and sort of start picking their brain.
And what is your message to teenagers, tweens, young adults that are listening and who say, already school is overwhelming and I have so many assignments? How do you encourage them to set aside time to read? And what is the barest minimum that one should be reading, say in a month? Is it one book a month, or how many minutes in a day? And I know reading is also, in a way, it's kind of mindfulness exercise, I would think. So what is your advice to young listeners? Or to anyone else?
Yeah. I love that you said reading is a kind of mindfulness. That's just so spot on. So I think that reading and writing can be therapeutic. It is a form of creative therapy. So even if you don't intend to become a published writer, if you're a teenager and you've got so much on your plate and there's a lot of overwhelming stuff going on, just journaling every day. And that doesn't mean Dear Diary. It could just be a journal of your goals for the week, or journal of things that went well that day. Just that very act is writing. And it's also therapeutic. And it's also a way to keep that creative muscle warm. I don't care how many books I read. I honestly think whatever you're reading is reading. So if it's a comic strip, if it's, post on Instagram, you're still reading. Just keep reading in whatever format makes you happy.
Okay. And is there anything else you would like to share with listeners? What about your contact info and any of the finer details so people can take advantage of Nicole as a book coach?
If you're a fiction writer, or if you're even considering being a fiction writer, I definitely want to support you. And people can sign up for a complimentary 20-minute call with me just to ask me all the questions they want and find out if we're a good fit.
Okay, perfect. And your website that you probably want to share?
It's NicoleMeierAuthor.com.
Okay, and Meier like Meier.
Yes.
Author.com. Nicole, Nicole Meier, author.com. Such a pleasant conversation. Thank you so much for your time today on the podcast, Nicole.
Thank you. I loved
so much fun. Yeah. And listeners, as always, subscribe to the podcast, follow the podcast, leave a review, and follow me on Instagram at YP for all things digital media and lifestyle. I will see you back again with yet another guest and yet another interesting topic. Until then, it's Vi saying so long.